Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems, welcoming you to our newest series, Sport Performance Pillars. This is going to be a 5-part series, releasing one video per week for the next 5 weeks, covering our principle-based approach to designing programs for sport performance. So to improve speed, power, conditioning specific to your sport, skill acquisition, introducing the ideas of special strength, transfer of training, all sorts of important stuff so you can design better programs for football players, wrestlers, MMA, BJJ, basketball, whoever it is that you work with a sound principle-based approach. So subscribe to the channel, enjoy the series. Welcome to part 1 of our Sport Performance Pillars series on understanding specificity. If you watched our Scientific Principles of Strength Training videos or read the book, you understand that specificity is the framework which all other training decisions are made. So it's the first thing that must be considered no matter what you're training for. And that's going to be different for a football player than it is for a power lifter, than it is for a basketball player, or MMA, or soccer, or all these different things. We have to consider the specificity for that sport. And to do that, we have to understand the athletes within that sport. Of course, there are technical and tactical considerations that every athlete's going to have to develop, and that's going to be the first and most important goal. But what we're going to deal with in this video series is physical preparation and specificity in that regard. And to do that, we need to look at the athlete, look how they behave on the field of play. So a lot of this is going to deal with how the athlete moves on the field. First, we need to consider the distance the athletes cover. For example, a football lineman, an offensive lineman in football, or a defensive lineman, they're probably covering between 0 and 20 yards per play, all in that range. Where a shot putter, they're covering a 7-foot circle every time they throw. And a basketball, maybe a forward in basketball, they're going to be moving in 5 to 30 yard intensive bouts. All of this information that we're about to talk about can be found in things called time motion analysis. And now with all the GPS technology and the great sports science technology available, this information is a lot easier to come by through a quick Google search. Once you've established the distances that the athlete covers during their sport, now we want to look at the velocity, the duration of those movements, and the different directions that those movements are happening in. So to go back to our example of an offensive lineman in football, they're going to be running, so sub-maximal speed, be sprinting, they're going to be pushing, they're moving forwards, backwards, and laterally in bouts of 3 to 7 seconds. For a shot putter, they're going to be sprinting in terms of creating maximal velocity across the ring. They're moving rotationally and both with linear and vertical force. And it happens in about 1 second. For the basketball forward, they're going to walk, they're going to jog, they're going to run, they're going to sprint, all directions, plus a lot of jumping. And that's really happening in 5 to maybe as long as 90-second bouts in combination of those different things between dead balls, timeouts, all that type of stuff. The next factor you need to consider when assessing an athlete and what is going to be specific to their training needs is the resistance they encounter along the way. So we've established how far they go, we've established how fast and what directions they go, how long those intensive bouts last. Now, what do they deal with along the way? And this is going to be much different and relate a lot to how much strength training that athlete needs. So a football lineman, during their movements on the field, they're encountering 200 to 350 pound opponents along the way. This is going to depend, of course, on the body weight if we're dealing with high school, college, professional players, but quite a bit of resistance, people trying to push back against them, trying to attack them. The shot putter, it's the same every time. They are encountering a 16-pound shot put. It's worth of resistance on their path. And for a basketball forward, they're pushing, they're shoving, boxing out people. So I'd say that's limited contact with their opponents who are going to be ranging in size from maybe 150 pounds all the way up to 300 pounds, and it's going to be somewhat dependent on position and again on level of play. The final point to consider when assessing how the athlete moves and how that's going to relate to the specificity of their physical preparation training is the number of efforts that they have, of intensive efforts they have how long of rest they have between those intensive efforts and what's happening during those rest or less intensive periods. So a football lineman, they're probably playing 50 to 75 plays per game, broken into series of 3 to 15 plays, with each play lasting about 3 to 7 seconds, as we mentioned earlier. And they have 15 seconds to maybe 45 seconds, potentially longer with a timeout, TV timeouts, that kind of stuff for college and NFL players in between those plays, and maybe 3 to as long as 20 or 30 minutes between the series, depending how fast their team gets the ball back. If there's injury timeouts, if it's halftime, they're getting a longer break there, certainly. Shot putters are going to have 6 throws in competition with 5 to maybe 15, 20 minutes in between those 1 second extremely explosive bursts of effort. They're going to have a little bit higher capacity than that for training. We'll talk about that more. For the basketball forward, they're going to be playing some amount of about 200 plays per game. 40 minute to 48 minute game, depending on level, with 15 seconds to maybe 20 minutes between intensive bouts. Again, that could be that they're walking or jogging, submaximal effort, standing, waiting for free throws to be shot during timeouts, out of bounds, dead balls. It could be as short as 10, 15 seconds where they're not going all out, sprinting, jumping, cutting, changing direction. Or it could be that they're sitting on the bench or in the locker room at halftime of the game. So that's what they need to be ready for in terms of capacity for their competition. Now, what they need to be ready for training can be a different story. Depending on your role with the athlete, if you are a strength coach for a high school football team, you might have a ton of input and intimate knowledge of what those practice settings look like, and know that they might need to be ready for way more in practice than what they're actually going to do in a game. For the shot putter, fairly straightforward. Maybe they're throwing 20, 30, maybe up to 50 times in a practice. But you can understand that that's about the capacity that they need, that in practice, that's going to happen every 2 or 3 minutes. Well, they'll have a little bit longer breaks in competition. And for basketball players, whether you're a coach of that basketball team, also handling the physical preparation, or you work on the outside, hopefully you can communicate with the coach or communicate with the players to have a good understanding of the demands of their practice schedule. So understanding all of this about how the athlete moves, so how far they're going, how fast they're moving, what directions, the duration of those high intensity efforts, the resistance they encounter along the way, and the number of those high intensity efforts that they have, how long the rest periods are, and what's happening during those rest periods. Are they just walking back to the huddle? Are they standing around waiting for their teammates to take their throws before they get another turn? Are they having some combination of running, jogging, walking, standing, like a basketball player is going to have? Extrapolate that out to whatever sport you are preparing for or you're preparing athletes for. All of that's going to relate to the needs, the strength training needs of the athlete. If you subscribe to Juggernaut Training Systems channel, you're probably very interested in this part of things. You love to lift, maybe you're a powerlifter or a weightlifter who also works with athletes. Understand that football players are not powerlifters. They're not Olympic weightlifters. Neither are shot putters. The strongest, most powerful athletes in sport. Yeah, they need to be very strong. But as we mentioned earlier, what resistance do they encounter? 16-pound shot put, not that heavy. Even for the football players and stuff, you can't train them exclusively like powerlifters or weightlifters because they have to move, they have greater conditioning demands on them, and it's just not necessary. 350-pound opponent, would it help to squat 700 pounds to overcome that person? Sure, but the effort and energy it would take to get up to that would take so much away from all the other more important things they need, like technique development, speed qualities. So there's definitely a point of diminishing returns for maximal strength development in regards to sport performance. So maximal strength is the ability of a particular group of muscles to produce a maximum voluntary contraction in response to optimal motivation against an external load. And that's right from the horse's mouth, Veroshansky in Super Training. So as a physical preparation coach, strength and conditioning coach, whatever you want to call it, it's very simple to understand maximal strength as the ability to move the heaviest weights possible in the powerlifting and weightlifting movements. So what is the point of diminishing returns here? If being maximally the strongest makes you the fastest, most powerful athlete in the world, as some strength coaches would suggest, then why isn't the NFL recruiting from World's Strongest Man, from the Olympics, from the U.S. Open for powerlifting, big dogs, all that stuff? And why isn't the 100-meter Olympic final filled with squat world record holders? Because there's a lot more that goes into sport performance than just maximal strength development. So I want to use an analogy from the great coach Charlie Francis, coach of Ben Johnson, someone who's been a huge influence on my thinking and many other coaches' thinking about sport performance. And this is an analogy he uses in regards to fatigue management, in which he likens the nervous system to a cup. And every stressor, every stimulus, every stress that is imposed on the athlete fills that cup up to a varying degree. The more stressful the activity, the bigger stimulus, the more it's going to fill the cup up. So what takes up the most space? What should take up the most space in the cup? And that's got to be sport practice. And this will differ, of course, at different times of the year, but the thing that's going to be most beneficial to athletes is practicing their sport. It's the most specific thing they can do. So we need to reserve space in the cup for that. So if sport practice is the only irreplaceable part of an athlete's training, that's what's going to fill the cup up the most. After that, sprinting and jumping drills likely have a higher correlation to sporting success than a lot of lifting movements, particularly the faster the movement happens in sport, the faster movements are going to correlate and cause them to have more success. So we need to allow space for those. Charlie has another great idea there, saying that weights follow speed. And he's not just talking about in the chronological sense that you're going to go to the weight room after you're out on the field or track, doing your sprints and jumps, but also in the prioritizing of things, that the more speed training, power speed qualities you're developing out there, and the more intensive and higher outputs the athletes are capable of, the less they will do in the weight room. And that the weight room needs to be reflective of what they've done prior and reactive in a lot of sense as well. That's not to say that there's going to be athletes who need to do more strength training relative to the field work they're doing. It can certainly be the case, but talking on average, following this idea of weights follow speed, because that's going to be the stuff, because the athletes move. Even the strongest, least movement requiring positions in football, like offensive line, defensive tackle, those guys still got to move, and the best players are fast, they're agile, they're powerful beyond the weight room. So then lifting to become as strong as possible, that's going to be almost our third priority here. But what is the best way to achieve that? And I've got tons of videos about this on the Juggernaut Training Systems channel, and I believe that that's going to be best achieved with the majority of work being done in about that 65 to 85% intensity range. So it's sub-maximal, and lifting weights at 65 to 85% is going to fill that cup up less, that cup that is the nervous system, than lifting maximal weights. So if lifting sub-maximal weights for strategic volumes is going to be a better way to become maximally strong than just lifting maximal weights, plus lifting those sub-maximal weights is going to fill the cup up less than doing max effort work, then that's another reason why just maximal strength, what you can do in the squat or bench or deadlift, snatch or clean for a 1 rep max, is probably not the highest priority for the athlete because of a relatively early point of diminishing returns. And it's changing a lot, from a tennis player is going to have much less benefit of maximal strength than an offensive lineman is going to, but it still all needs to be considered. So all of this, all of the specificity, the question that we're really getting at is, how does this transfer to the athlete's on field, on court, on track, in ring performance? And this concept is called transfer of training. So what is transfer of training? Essentially is what you do in preparation for competition can be demonstrated through objective analysis to either increase an athlete's sport performance or not increase an athlete's sport performance. So basically, what did the exercises you chose to do in the weight room, on the field, things beyond sport practice, did they make them better, or did it not affect their performance? That is what we are trying to achieve, the highest levels of transfer. Being most economical, efficient in our choices as strength and conditioning, as physical preparation coaches, to help the athletes on-field performance, their sport performance increase. And this is going to happen through strategically selecting our exercises. And Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, who wrote the book, Transfer of Training for Sport, which I highly suggest, he classifies exercises from least transfer to most transfer. So working our way up that, and this kind of goes along with, if you've read my article, Pyramid of Strength, a lot of that's based on this concept. So down at the bottom of the pyramid, we have general preparatory exercises. So these are exercises with different energy systems, different movement patterns than what happens in the athlete's sport performance. This is gonna be basic body weight exercises, prehab, rehab type of stuff. Really no transfer, just kind of general fitness, the absolute bottom of the pyramid. Moving up from there, we have special preparatory exercises. This is where the same muscles and energy systems are being used, but through different movement patterns than what happens in the sport. So a lot of barbell and dumbbell training for maximum and explosive strength is going to fall into this category. General jumping drills as well. Moving up in specificity and transfer a little bit from there, these special developmental exercises. Here, the same muscles and energy systems that are used in parts of the competitive movement are being trained. These need to be overloading in some way. And there's going to be a future video in this series that talks about exercise selection and choosing special strength exercises with high transfer, much more in depth. But it's very important that these exercises are overloading in some way. Again, going back to scientific principles of strength training, specificity number 1, principle number 2, principle of overload, that the training must be stimulating enough to drive adaptation. So for powerlifting, weightlifting, it's a pretty straightforward concept. You have to do enough volume to make your muscles bigger, or enough weight to make them more force producing. But as we get into some of these special strength exercises and a little bit more complex context of sport performance training, the waters get muddied a lot in these terms of special strength or sport specific, because a lot of times people will choose exercises that are the exact same thing as the sporting movement, and they're not overloading in any way. So what are they actually accomplishing if they don't require you to produce somewhat more force than you will on the field, or cause you to move at a slightly higher velocity, overloading one of those qualities? That's what we're looking for here in the special developmental exercises. And these could be things like explosive sled pushing for an offensive and defensive lineman, rotational throwing drills like twisting med ball throws, or throwing kettlebells in a twisting manner for the shot putter, resisted jumping or sprinting for a basketball player. And then finally at the top of the pyramid, competition exercise, the sport practice. We could get into 3-on-3 instead of 5-on-5 basketball or small-sided games and stuff, but that would all fall under competition exercise. So if you want to learn more about transfer of training, check out the book, Transfer of Training for Sport by Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk. It's very dense read. To distill that information a little bit, I would suggest to check out the website Hammer Media, HMMR Media, created by a longtime student of Dr. Bondarchuk, Martin Bingesser. Martin's written some great articles for Juggernaut as well. Mladen Jovanovic and his website Complementary Training has a lot of interesting information about transfer of training. And of course, one of the biggest influences on my understanding of sport performance training, James Smith. Go visit his website, Global Sport Concepts. So that's going to be video number 1 in our Sport Performance Pillars series, helping you gain a better understanding of specificity. So make sure you go watch your athletes, see how they move on the field. How far, how fast, what resistance are they encountering? What directions are they moving in? What are they doing in between those intensive bouts? And use that information to begin to guide how they need to train. How much maximal strength work do they need to do? How far should they be sprinting? How much aerobic capacity is necessary for success in their sport and developing capacity for their sport practice. This is going to be step one to designing really effective programs for sport performance. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Look for the other 4 parts of this series coming over the next 4 weeks.